I was 22 cycles old when I first heard the warning, and I laughed. Not out loud. I was not stupid enough to laugh out loud in the instruction hall of the Osavane Fleet Academy, not with Senior Instructor Vareth Munn standing at the lectern with his three-scarred face and his absolute stillness, the kind of stillness you only see in old soldiers and in stone. I laughed the way young officers laugh at things they have already decided are beneath them, quietly, behind the eyes, with just enough restraint to keep it off the face. My cohort did the same. I could see it in them the way you can see weather in a sky you have studied long enough. The slight tightening at the corners of Delveth's mouth, the careful neutrality Orsh maintained that was itself a kind of smirk, the way Tav settled back in his seat with the comfortable patience of someone waiting for the lesson to end so he could say what he actually thought. We were third-rank trainees, 8 months from our first posting, and we had already decided which parts of the curriculum were serious and which were ritual. Propulsion theory was serious. Tactical geometry was serious. Weapons integration, com-threading, the 17 damage containment protocols, serious, all of it, the steel spine of what we were being trained to do. But the forbidden designation module was something else. It was the hour every cohort sat through every term, the lesson that had been delivered in this same hall by this same lectern for longer than any of us had been alive, and it never changed, not by a word, not by a single updated datum. That was the first thing that made us doubt it. Science that does not update is not science. It is scripture. Instructor Munn did not notice our doubt, or he did not care. He was past the age of caring whether young officers believed him. He had been delivering the warning for 31 terms, and he would deliver it until he died or retired. And in all those years, not one cohort had come back from its first posting and told him he was wrong. That was the thing none of us understood yet. We thought his persistence was stubbornness. We had not yet grasped that it was mathematics. He laid the chart on the display table and let it sit there a moment before he spoke. The Osavane reach, sector by sector our space, the Council's space, the neutral corridors where trade moved and the old treaties held. All of it rendered in the cool blue light of the projection table, a civilization mapped and known. And then at the far edge of the display, a region that was not mapped, a region that was not absent, it was deliberate. The cartographic convention for a forbidden designation was a deep amber wash, the color of old warning paint on a reactor housing, the color you learned in your first week of any technical training to treat as a hard boundary. Do not open, do not enter, do not touch. The amber wash covered 11 sectors. The forbidden designation for what the Council's registry calls the Sol Proximity Volume, Instructor Munn said, was entered into the binding record 1742 standard years ago. It has been renewed without debate at every council session since. No motion to review it has passed in 600 years. No survey vessel has been formally commissioned to enter it in 412 years. The last fleet to transit the outer marker returned with one ship of the 7 that went in, and that ship returned silent. He let the silence sit. He was good at that. The species that held that volume before the designation was entered, he continued, occupied the space with approximately 1,200 active vessels of varying class, a population distributed across 6 primary worlds and 41 secondary installations, and a military capacity that the Council Survey Commission at the time rated as moderate, formidable by regional standards, overextended by galactic ones. Their name in the registry is the Tariq Compact. Their collective name for themselves, the name their own records used, was something that does not translate cleanly into the Osavane tongue, but the closest rendering is simply the word for what they called their own kind, their word for themselves. He touched the table and the amber wash deepened slightly, and within it a pale marker appeared, a species classification glyph, the kind the registry assigned to every catalogued civilization. They were not the first species to enter the Sol Proximity Volume without authorization. They were not the second or the third. They were, by the best count the archivists have been able to reconstruct, the 26th. The registry's record of the 26 incursions is incomplete. Some are documented only by the silence that followed, the absence of ships that had been present in border traffic and then were simply not present anymore. Some are documented by survivor testimony. Some are documented only by the fact that a species classification glyph that appears in older records does not appear in more recent ones. He turned from the table. The humans, he said, did not ask any of those 26 species to enter their space. They did not provoke the incursions. They did not negotiate before responding. They did not issue warnings, with one documented exception, and that exception is noted in the record because it appears to have been a courtesy rather than a standard protocol, as though someone thought to tell a person that the door they were opening led to a drop, not a room, not because telling them was required. Because it was, for some reason, considered appropriate. Delveth shifted in her seat. Orsh had stopped performing neutrality and was now simply blank, which meant he was thinking, which meant the lesson had caught something in him despite himself. Tav had straightened. I had not moved. I was listening, the way I listened to things I had already categorized as mythology, with the front of my attention while the back of it maintained its conclusions. You will be posted, Instructor Munn said, in most cases, to fleet assignments that will never require you to go within 800 sector units of the Sol proximity volume. The designation has made that proximity functionally unnecessary. There is nothing in those 11 sectors that any fleet needs, and there is no strategic value in being near what the designation describes. But some postings, specifically, watchpost assignments along the outer border corridor, will put you within sensor range of the designation's edge. And if you are posted there, the following applies. He pulled up a second layer on the display. A ring of installations, small and widely spaced at the outermost boundary of the amber wash. Watchposts. I recognized the architecture. They were standard 4th-tier remote outposts, the kind the fleet used for deep border monitoring. Not weapons platforms, not garrison forts. Monitoring stations with minimal crew, minimal armament, one escape vessel per station. The kind of posting given to junior officers because there was nothing expected to happen, and the experience of waiting was itself considered part of the training. Watchpost stations along the outer marker are not combat stations, Instructor Munn said. Their function is observation and relay. If a vessel is observed crossing the outer marker from within the designation toward unrestricted space, the protocol is to record the transit, relay the observation to Sector Command, and take no further action. If a vessel is observed approaching the outer marker from unrestricted space toward the designation, the protocol is to hail the vessel on standard frequencies, relay the forbidden designation status, advise the vessel to alter course, log the exchange, and relay to Sector Command. Under no circumstances is a watchpost officer to cross the marker. Under no circumstances is a watchpost officer to respond to a contact originating from within the designation with anything other than a logged relay. Under no circumstances is a watchpost officer to disembark from the station to investigate any anomaly observed at or near the outer marker. He looked at us. These protocols are not suggestions. They are not conservative estimates of appropriate caution. They are the product of 400 years of incident records. Every deviation from them that appears in those records was followed within a documented interval by an entry that reads, "Crew status unknown." I want you to understand what that phrase means when it appears in a watchpost incident record. It does not mean missing. It does not mean uncontactable. It means that the station's automated systems continued to function normally, telemetry, sensor logs, environmental controls, all of it nominal, and that the crew was not present. No distress signal, no last transmission, no indication of a struggle. The station intact and operational and empty. The room was quiet now, really quiet, not the performed quiet of young officers waiting for the lesson to end, but the genuine quiet of people who have just had something land in them they had not expected. "Crew status unknown," he said again. In 400 years of watchpost records, that phrase appears 11 times. In 11 cases, the station was found intact. In 0 of those 11 cases was any trace of the crew recovered. He closed the display. "You will have 2 hours with the module's reference materials before your final practical session tomorrow. The warning is in the record. It has always been in the record. What you do with it is the first test of judgment you will encounter in this career that actually matters." He gathered his materials and left without waiting for questions. I walked back to the barracks with Delvith and Tav and Orsh, and Tav said what we were all thinking, which was that the thing with the missing crews was probably a records error, because the fleet's archival system before the third reform was famously unreliable, and Delvith said that was true, and also the whole module was probably kept in the curriculum for institutional reasons rather than because anyone in the senior staff actually believed it. And Orsh was quiet for a moment, and then said he thought the part about the 26 species was likely exaggerated, but that the watchpost protocols themselves were probably sound, because remote postings always generated conservative protocols whether or not the underlying threat was real, and I agreed with all of it. I was 22 cycles old. I had read everything the Academy had to offer and done well on every evaluation, and I had a good mind for the kind of pattern recognition that made fleet officers effective, and none of that had yet taught me the thing that Instructor Munn had understood for 31 terms, that a warning you dismiss is a warning that has already begun to kill you. The dismissal is the first step of the path. You don't take the second step in the Academy. You take it later, at the posting, when the environment confirms your dismissal for 8 months, and you forget that the environment is not the threat. I was posted to Watchpost Station 11 of the Outer Osavane marker 8 months later. My cohort mates Delvith and Orsh and Tav were posted with me, along with 4 others from the cohort that had preceded us, a senior by a year named Seth, 2 others named Valen and Merle, and a 4th whose name I will not write down because to write it down is to give it a weight it still carries in me, and I am not ready for that, not even now. I will call her the 4th one. She was the best technician among us, and the quietest, and she had the kind of specific competence that makes a person essential to the function of whatever space they occupy, without ever making them central to the drama of it. She kept the station's sensor suite calibrated, and the comm relay systems running clean and the environmental processors maintained to a standard that was 2 grades above what the posting required. She was very good at her work, and she did it without comment, and I think about her most of all when I think about those 8 months. The station was what Instructor Munn had described, a 4th-tier remote installation, 6 crew habitation pods arranged around a central operations ring, a docking collar that accommodated our single assigned escape vessel, and a sensor envelope that reached 22 sector units in all directions. The amber wash on our navigation display stopped about 6 sector units to our sole ward side. In every practical sense, we were looking at nothing, the edge of a designation, the end of a mapped region, 6 sector units of unremarkable space between our station and the outer marker, and then the amber wash, and then whatever the amber wash meant. For 8 months, it meant nothing visible. This is important to say plainly. For 8 months we saw what every watchpost crew sees, which is transit traffic in the unrestricted corridors and the occasional probe or survey drone that came close enough to the marker to warrant a hail and a redirect and nothing else. The designation was quiet. The amber wash sat at the edge of our sensors like a coast sits at the edge of a chart, present, defined, entirely inert. We ran the protocols. We filed the reports. We performed our rotations and maintained the equipment, and had the conversations you have when 8 people live in close quarters for a long time. The small agreements and small irritations. The way Tav's habitual optimism became either a comfort or a source of friction depending on the shift. The way Seth's seniority by 1 year expressed itself, as a kind of benign competence he was slightly too aware of. The way the fourth one's silence in the common spaces came to feel like the room's most comfortable furniture. 8 months is long enough that a thing you started afraid of becomes ordinary, and a thing you started dismissing becomes almost fondly familiar. The amber wash on the display stopped registering as a warning and started registering as geography. I caught myself once using it as a reference landmark when I was orienting a transit traffic plot, the way you would use a coastline or a range of dead stars as a bearing anchor. I noted it at the time as a minor irony. I understand now that it was not ironic. It was the process working exactly as it was designed to work, not by the fleet's designers, who built the watchpost to make young officers careful, by time, which builds young officers into whatever the environment shapes them into, and an environment that is quiet for long enough shapes them into people who are comfortable, and comfort at the border is the beginning of the outcome the warning describes. The fourth one never became comfortable. I noticed this during the 6th month, when I started paying attention to things I had not thought to pay attention to before. She was always professional, always correct in her duties, but there was a quality to how she sat at the sensor station that the rest of us did not share, a watchfulness that did not relax on the quiet shifts, that did not ease into the settled rhythm we had all fallen into. She slept less than the rest of us. Not obviously less. She kept her rotation schedule and filed no medical deviation reports. But I noticed that when I passed the sensor station at odd hours, she was often there, running checks that were technically off rotation, refinements to the calibration thresholds that were well beyond what the posting required. I asked her once, somewhere in the 7th month, whether she thought the calibration was genuinely substandard or whether she was running extra checks for another reason. She looked at me steadily and said that she found the extra work useful. I did not press it. I should have asked more directly what she meant by useful. I did not. We talked about the warning a few times, in the way you talk about something that is not proving itself dangerous. Orsh said once, during a late shift when the sensor display was uniformly empty and the amber wash sat where it always sat, that he thought the actual history was probably accurate, 26 species, crew status unknown, all of it probably real, but that the lesson the Academy drew from it was wrong. That the lesson was not be afraid, but be careful, and that being careful was what we were already doing, by running the protocols and staying on station, and not doing the things the protocols told us not to do. Delvith agreed. Tav said he thought the humans were probably not as aware of the Watchpost network as we were inclined to assume, given that the network's communication band was narrow and externally indistinguishable from natural background radiation at any distance greater than 3 sector units, and that what the record described as deliberate responses to incursions might be more accurately described as automated systems responding to proximity triggers that the incursing species had no way to anticipate. I said I thought that was probably the most accurate reading. The fourth one said nothing. She was recalibrating the sensor array and she said nothing, but I remember that she stopped what she was doing for a moment when I said that. Just stopped, and then went back to the calibration. I did not think about it at the time. At the start of the 9th month, a vessel crossed the outer marker. Not toward us, not toward the unrestricted corridor. The transit was lateral. The vessel appeared on the sensor display moving along what would have been a parallel line to the marker's edge if it had been on our side, but it was on the inner side, within the designation. We had never, in 8 months, observed a vessel within the designation. The sensor suite could see 6 sector units into the amber wash on a clear read, and in 8 months it had seen nothing but empty space. And then it saw this. I was on the operations ring when it appeared. The fourth one was at the sensor station. She saw it first, a fraction of a second before the alert sounded, and I saw her face as she read what the display was showing her, and the expression on her face was not alarm. It was something else. A specific kind of recognition, the kind that only comes when something confirms a conclusion you reached quietly and kept to yourself because the conclusion was not welcome. She said vessel contact, inner designation, parallel transit, lateral bearing 6 sector units. I came to the station and looked at the display, and she was right, a single vessel, of a class our sensor suite's recognition library did not match to any cataloged profile. The silhouette was unfamiliar. The drive signature was unfamiliar. The vessel was not moving toward us. It was not moving away from us. It was moving along the boundary, 6 sector units inside the amber wash, at a pace that suggested either routine transit or deliberate survey, and it was not doing anything that the watchpost protocols required us to do anything about. Protocol was clear. Log the contact, relay to sector command, take no further action. I logged the contact. I relayed to sector command. I took no further action. The others were woken by the alert and came to the operations ring. Seth reviewed the contact data with the careful competence that defined him. Tav suggested it was most likely a survey probe of a type we hadn't seen before, possibly from one of the Council's auxiliary survey programs that operated on independent schedules and used proprietary equipment. Orsh said that was plausible, but that the drive signature was inconsistent with any survey program in the open-source equipment registry, and that the hull profile didn't match any civilian classification he was aware of. Delveth said it didn't matter what type of vessel it was, because the protocol was clear and we were following it. Valen and Merle stood at the edge of the operations ring and looked at the display and said nothing. The vessel continued its lateral transit for approximately 4 standard hours. Then it stopped. It stopped 6 sector units inside the amber wash, and it held position, and the sensor suite confirmed that it was holding position oriented toward our station. Not approaching, not retreating, stopped and pointed at us, which was a different thing. The protocols covered this. A vessel within the designation that assumed a stationary position oriented toward a watchpost installation was to be logged, relayed, and responded to with a standard identification query on the designated frequency. Not an engagement, not an approach, a query. I transmitted the identification query per protocol, logged the transmission, and relayed the updated contact report to Sector Command. There was no response to the query. What there was, and this is the part I have spent years trying to describe accurately, and I am not confident I have ever managed it, was a change in the quality of the quiet. This sounds like nothing. I know it sounds like nothing. I'm a trained observer, and I have filed more contact reports than I can count over the 30 years since that posting, and in every one of them I have described what the sensors showed and what the instruments measured, because that is the language of the record. But the sensors showed nothing beyond what I have described, and the instruments measured nothing anomalous, and yet something changed in the station that did not come from any instrument. The quality of the quiet changed. The air tasted different. The light from the displays seemed to have a slightly different weight. Valen moved to the edge of the operations ring in a specific way, not urgently, not deliberately, but in the way a person moves when the architecture of the room they are standing in has silently rearranged itself. Merle reached for the edge of the console and held it, not gripping, just holding. I looked at the fourth one. She was watching the display. Her expression was the same expression I had seen when the contact first appeared, that specific recognition, that settled quality of someone who had expected this and had hoped to be wrong. Should we break relay protocol and open a direct line to Sector Command? Delveth asked. Her voice was level. The relay is sufficient, I said. We wait for command response. The vessel did not move. We waited for 6 hours. Sector Command's response arrived in the standard relay band, and it said what I had expected it to say. The contact had been received. The identification query had been logged. A senior review was in progress. Maintain current protocols. Do not approach. Do not alter station position. Do not transmit on any frequency other than the designated relay band. The message was signed by a duty officer I did not know, at a rank 2 grades above mine, and its tone was the tone of someone who was being careful in a way that suggested they had seen something like this before. I relayed the command response to the crew. Tav said that made him feel better because at least command was engaged. Orsh said he thought the vessel was probably unmanned, a probe of some kind, automated, which would explain the lack of response to the identification query and also the unusual profile. Seth agreed that unmanned was more likely than manned at that range and bearing. The fourth one said quietly, "It's manned." Everyone looked at her. "The drive signature's thermal variation pattern," she said. "It's not consistent with a fully automated system. There's a thermal deviation in the secondary register, regular interval, roughly every 20 seconds. That's a life support heat cycle. Something on that vessel is generating a metabolic thermal signature." Orsh looked at the sensor display. He was quiet for a moment. "She's right," he said. "I should have seen that." "What kind of metabolic signature?" Delveth asked. The fourth one was quiet for a moment. "Large, single source, consistent." We did not speak about what that meant. We did not need to. The registry's documentation on the Sol proximity volume's primary inhabitants was one of the most thoroughly cross-referenced biological files in the Council's database, compiled from the debris of every incursion and the reports of every survey vessel that had approached the outer marker close enough to gather any data at all. The physiological profile of the species the registry designated as the Terran cohort, the current inhabitants, the ones who had occupied the volume through every incursion, every designation renewal, every century of the Amber Wash, that profile was in the registry, and it included thermal output ranges. I did not look up the thermal output ranges at that moment. I did not need to. The fourth one had run the comparison already, in her own head, with the sensor data she was reading, and the expression on her face told me the comparison had come back within range. The vessel held position for another 4 hours. Then it began to move not toward us, not away from us, but along the marker again, lateral transit, resuming what it had been doing before it stopped. Moving parallel to the boundary, 6 sector units inside the Amber Wash, in the direction it had originally been traveling. We tracked it for 2 hours. Then it moved beyond the outer edge of our sensor range, into the deeper interior of the designation, and the display was empty again. "It's gone," Tav said. "It's not gone," the fourth one said. "We just can't see it anymore." Command's follow-up relay arrived 40 minutes later. It confirmed that the contact had been reviewed and that it was classified as a nominal transient within the designation, consistent with routine internal traffic, no further action required, maintain standard protocols. The message was still signed by the duty officer. Its tone was still careful. I logged it and relayed it to the crew and said that we would return to standard rotation. Nobody said anything about this in the common spaces that night. I did not sleep well, but I would not have called it fear. I would have called it the feeling of a question that has been answered in a language you do not speak, and the answer is perfectly clear and you cannot read it. The following day was a standard rotation. The sensor display was normal. The relay traffic was normal. The Amber Wash sat at the edge of our range, and the space between us and it was empty and quiet. The day after that, Valen did not report for his morning rotation. He was in his pod. He was alive. When Seth went to his pod to check on him, he was sitting on his bunk with his back against the wall, looking at the wall. And when Seth spoke to him, he answered, calmly and clearly, that he did not think he wanted to go to the operations ring today. Seth asked if he was unwell. Valen said he was not unwell. He was just going to stay in his pod. Seth reported this to me. I went to Valen's pod and spoke with him. He was coherent, not distressed in any way I could identify clinically, and he told me that he had decided he would rather stay in his pod than be on the operations ring, and that he was happy to file whatever paperwork was required to document the rotation deviation, and that he was not sick and not in distress, and would resume his rotation when he felt like it. I filed the deviation log. I relayed it to Command in the standard medical incident band. Command acknowledged and said to monitor. On the third day, Merle requested permanent reassignment to support duties that did not involve primary sensor monitoring. She gave a technical reason, a calibration variance she had identified in the tertiary sensor array that she thought warranted extended manual correction. It was a reasonable request. I approved it and logged it. On the fourth day, Tav came to the operations ring for his rotation and stayed his full shift and performed his duties correctly, and then at the end of the shift, before he left the ring, he stood at the sensor display for a long time and looked at the amber wash and said, very quietly, as if he was not saying it to me but to himself, "I don't think I was right about the probe theory." "No," I said, "neither do I." "I think the fourth one was right," he said, "about the thermal signature." "I think so too." He nodded. He left the ring. He was back for his next rotation and every rotation after that. Tav was that kind of person. He needed to say the thing out loud and then he could continue. I respected that about him, then and now. I respected it especially because I could not do it myself. I could not say the thing out loud, not then. I could only log it in the record and continue. On the seventh day, Delveth woke up before her rotation and told me she needed to speak with me in the command alcove, which was the most private space on the station. And when we were there, she told me in a low and completely steady voice that she thought we should request early rotation back to sector base. Not because anything had happened, she said. Because nothing had happened, and because that itself was the thing. Because the vessel had been there and had looked at us and had gone, and we were all fine, all 8 of us. And she thought that was the most frightening version of this situation. And she was not sure she was going to be able to keep rotating indefinitely in the condition she was currently in. I told her I understood, and I filed the early rotation request with Sector Command, and Command denied it in the standard reply band. The standard reply said that watchpost rotation schedules were set on a fixed cycle, and early rotation required a documented emergency medical or structural incident, and that a contact log did not constitute either. The message was signed by a different duty officer this time, at the same grade. Its tone was the same. Delveth received the denial without comment and returned to her rotation. On the 9th day, the vessel came back. It came from the opposite direction this time, which meant it had completed a transit of some kind in the interval and returned on the other bearing, and it stopped at the same position, 6 sector units inside the outer marker, oriented toward our station, and it held position. I logged the contact. I transmitted the identification query. I relayed the contact report to Sector Command. This time, there was a response to the query. Not on the standard frequency. On a frequency that was not in our communications array's active band, a frequency the station's equipment was not broadcasting on. A passive frequency. The kind your equipment picks up when you are not transmitting, when the receiver is just open to whatever the local electromagnetic environment contains. It was not a transmission. It was closer to a presence in the band, a weight in the frequency. The comms array's automated monitoring system flagged it as anomalous, which was how I noticed it, because it was not something you would find by looking at the standard contact report. It was in the low-register anomaly log that nobody looked at except during quarterly maintenance audits. The 4th one was at the sensor station, and she had the low-register anomaly log open on her secondary display, and she was looking at it. "Do you want me to characterize it?" she asked. Her voice was the same as always. "Yes," I said. She was quiet for a while. The rest of the crew had come to the ring when the contact alert sounded, and they stood at their stations and looked at the displays and waited. "It's not a signal," she said. "It's not patterned. It doesn't carry information, not in any encoding structure I can identify. It's more like," she paused, It's more like when you walk into a room where someone is already sitting in the dark and you can't see them, but you know they're there because the air has a different quality. It's presence, not communication, just presence. Orsh said, "That's not a technical characterization." "No," she said, "it isn't." We sat with that. The vessel held position for 3 hours. Then the frequency anomaly faded. The vessel resumed its lateral transit and moved toward the outer edge of our sensor range and disappeared into the interior of the designation again. I filed the contact report. I included the frequency anomaly in the supporting data with a note that characterization was incomplete. I relayed the full package to Sector Command. Command's response arrived in 6 hours. It was addressed specifically to me, rather than to the station in the standard form, and it was signed by a senior officer at a grade 4 levels above mine. And it said, in precise administrative language, that my contact report had been received and reviewed, and that the station's crew was to be placed on medical observation protocol immediately, and that the early rotation request was now approved, and that a relief crew and medical assessment team would arrive at the station within 18 standard days, and that in the intervening period all crew were to maintain standard protocols, and the records from this posting were to be preserved in full. 18 days. I told the crew that the early rotation had been approved and that relief was coming. The reaction was not what I had expected. There was no relief, not in the way I had anticipated. There was instead something quieter, a kind of settling, like a room whose air pressure equalizes after a door has been opened and closed. Tav nodded. Delva thanked me. Orsh went back to his station. Seth said that was good news and went to tell Valen and Merle. The fourth one was still at the sensor station. She was looking at the display where the amber wash sat at the edge of the range. She said, to the display, not to me, 18 days is a long time. It is, I said. She said nothing else. We ran the protocols for 11 more days without incident. Valen came back to his rotation on day 6 of the remaining stretch and did not explain why, and no one asked. Merle stayed on support duties. The rest of us rotated as normal. The sensor display was empty. The amber wash did not change. The relay traffic was normal. On the 12th day, Tav did not report for his rotation. He was not in his pod. He was not anywhere on the station. His suit was in the suit locker. His personal effects were in his pod. His last logged activity was a standard rotation entry, filed by the automated timestamping system, 12 hours before I noticed his absence. The station's internal movement log showed his badge reading at his pod, at the common spaces, at the operations ring for his rotation, and then nothing. No badge reading at the docking collar. No activation of the escape vessel. No door event at any internal or external hatch. The station's environmental systems showed no anomaly. Nothing showed an anomaly. Tav was not on the station. I filed a crew status report. I used the phrase I had heard Instructor Munn say 7 years earlier in the instruction hall, standing at the lectern with his 3-scarred face. I wrote, "Crew status unknown." I sent it on the priority relay band. I also, separately, in a personal entry that I marked sealed internal and did not relay to command, wrote down everything I could remember about the quality of the air in the station over the preceding 12 hours, which was nothing I could characterize technically, and the expression on the fourth one's face when she looked at the display, which was not fear and not grief, and not anything I had a clean word for. It was the expression of someone watching a calculation proceed correctly. We searched the station in the methodical way the protocols required. Every compartment, every storage bay, the maintenance crawlspaces, the environmental processor housing, the docking collar in its locked and sealed state. We checked the escape vessel's launch log and confirmed it had not been activated. We checked the internal movement logs 3 separate times, looking for a gap or an anomaly that might explain a physical path from the last badge reading to an exit. There was no gap. The badge reading was the last data the station's systems had on Tav, and then the systems had nothing, and the nothing was itself the answer because the systems do not fail to record. They are redundant precisely so they cannot fail to record. If they had nothing, it was because there was nothing to record. No hatch opened. No vessel departed. No environmental seal was broken. No alarm tripped. Tav was on the station, and then he was not on the station, and the space between those two facts contained no mechanism. Orsh, who had a precise and methodical mind, and who coped with uncertainty by finding the technical description that best approximated it, said that the scenario reminded him of a class of quantum event that was theorized in deep astrophysics, but not considered physically accessible at the scale of individual organisms. A transition between states that left no trace in the intermediate medium, because the transition was not through the medium but perpendicular to it. He said this quietly to no one in particular while looking at the wall of the operations ring. Then he said he was aware that was not a satisfying explanation. Delveth said that no explanation was going to be satisfying and that we should file the report and wait for the relief crew. Seth said yes. The fourth one said nothing. I found her at the sensor station an hour later, not running calibrations, just sitting. She was looking at the amber wash on the display, and she had the expression I had been seeing on her face since the contact 7 days before, but it was different now. The calculation preceding quality was gone, and in its place was something that I could only describe as grief, quiet and complete. Not shock, grief. As though she had known the result of the calculation since before the calculation ran and had been carrying the knowledge of it. And now the knowledge had been confirmed, and the confirmation did not surprise her, and the absence of surprise made the grief heavier, not lighter. I sat down next to her at the secondary station. We were both quiet for a while. I said, "Did you know?" She said, "I thought." I said, "How long?" She said, "Since the first contact, when I saw the thermal signature." She paused. The way it stopped and oriented toward us. It wasn't threat assessment. I've read enough contact documentation to know what threat assessment looks like in an approach pattern. It was inventory. It was reading us individually. And Tav, she stopped. I waited. Tav was the one I worried about from the beginning of the posting, she said. Not because he was careless, he was careful. He ran the protocols correctly every rotation. But the protocols are external. The protocols can't fix what's internal. And what was internal in Tav was a fundamental refusal to accept that the thing on the other side of the marker was what the record said it was. He kept finding alternative explanations. Not irresponsible explanations, plausible ones. He was genuinely trying to understand it accurately. But accurate understanding was not available at this range, and the gap between what he could understand accurately and what was actually present, she was quiet again. I think that gap was what it found interesting. The relief crew arrived on the 16th day, 2 days ahead of schedule. There were 7 of us left when they docked, myself, Delveth, Orsh, Seth, Valen, Merle, and the 4th one. The medical assessment team came aboard and took readings and asked questions and wrote things in their pads. I gave them the full record, the contact logs, the frequency anomaly data, the rotation deviation logs, the crew's status report. The senior medical officer, an older woman whose name I remember but will not write here, read through the record with the unhurried thoroughness of someone who has read records like this before. And when she finished, she looked at me with an expression that I recognized, because it was close to the expression Instructor Munn had worn in the instruction hall. She said, "This is a complete record. Thank you for maintaining it." I said, "One crew member is unaccounted for." "Yes," she said, "I see that." "The record shows no mechanism," I said. "No hatch event, no departure, nothing." "No," she said, "records like this generally don't." I had nothing to say to that. We transferred to the relief vessel and left the station. Tav's status was never resolved. The investigation, I was told later by a duty officer who seemed to think the telling was a kindness, found no mechanism. The station was intact. All systems nominal. No evidence of unauthorized entry or exit. The final finding was crew status unknown, which was filed in the same archive that held the 11 other cases from 400 years of watchpost records. And then the file was sealed, and the archive closed around it the way water closes around a stone. I did not ask the question I most wanted to ask, which was whether any of the 11 previous cases had also involved a contact with a lateral transit vessel that stopped and oriented toward the station. I did not ask because I thought, by then, that I already knew the answer, and knowing it would not bring Tav back. We were debriefed at Sector Base over 4 days. The sessions were thorough and methodical and conducted by officers who asked their questions in the careful language of people who were not surprised by what they were hearing. Delveth gave her account. Orsh gave his. Seth, Valen, Merle, all of them. I gave mine. The fourth one gave hers last, in a session I was not present for, and when she came out she looked the same as she always looked, except that she was carrying herself slightly differently, a fractional change in posture, the way a person carries themselves when they have set something down that they had been holding for a long time. She found me in the corridor outside the debriefing offices, and she stood next to me and was quiet for a moment and then said, "Do you want to know what I think happened?" I said I did. She said, "I think it was looking at us. I think it was looking at each of us individually, and it was deciding something, not whether to act. It had already decided not to act. It was deciding something else. And Tav," she stopped. She was quiet. Tav was comfortable. He was never going to be afraid of it. And I think being not afraid of it was the wrong answer. I think the correct answer, the answer the warning is trying to give you, is not fear. It's respect. It's knowing what you are standing next to. And Tav didn't know, even at the end. He was still working on the probe theory somewhere in himself. And I think. She stopped again. "What?" I said. "I think it might have been curious about someone who wasn't afraid," she said. "And I think curiosity is worse." She left Sector Base the following week. I do not know where she was posted after that. I did not look it up. Some things you leave at the edge of knowing. I was posted to fleet duty for the next 6 years, well away from the outer border, and I did my work and did it well and was promoted twice. And I did not talk about the watchpost posting unless someone asked directly, and when they asked I said it had been uneventful, which was the only answer that was both true and not true at the same time. I was asked once, by a senior officer who had read my service record and noticed the gap between the routine of it and the sealed supplementary file attached to it, whether I would characterize my time at Watchpost 11 as having changed my assessment of the forbidden designation module. I said that it had. He asked how. I said that I had gone into the posting believing the warning was institutional caution built around incomplete data and culturally transmitted anxiety. I said that I had come out of the posting believing the warning was accurate and that the data behind it was, if anything, understated. He looked at me for a moment and said, "That's the standard outcome for that posting." I said, "Yes, I think I understand that now." He said, "Do you want to know what happens to the people who go in and come out still disbelieving?" I said I did. He said, "They don't go in and come out disbelieving, I mean. They go in disbelieving and they come out one of 2 ways, the way you came out, or they don't come out." He meant it as a statement of statistics, not of fate. But statistics, when they run cleanly enough for long enough, begin to take on the weight of fate. The galaxy has had a long time to compile its statistics on this particular question. I took the Academy posting 12 years after Watchpost 11. I had served long enough to carry the scars the posting required, not the 3 facial scars of Instructor Mun, but a different kind, the kind you carry in how you hold yourself when the amber wash appears on a display and the rest of the room doesn't know what it is looking at. I had served long enough to know what Vareth Mun had known for 31 terms, and to know why he had kept delivering the lesson without expecting the cadets to believe it, and why that was the right approach. You do not deliver the warning because you expect the young to believe it. You deliver the warning because you want it in their record. Because when the moment comes, and it always comes, for the ones posted near the border, you want them to be able to remember the lesson, even if they laughed at it. You want the shape of it available to them when the quality of the air changes and the sensor display shows a vessel they have never seen before, and the only thing between them and the decision that kills them is a remembered protocol they once dismissed as institutional overcaution. I delivered the warning for 16 terms in the same hall where I had first received it. Lectern, projection table, the amber wash laid out sector by sector, the 26 species, the 11 entries reading crew status unknown. The instruction hall did not change. The lesson did not change. The cadets laughed, not out loud, behind the eyes, with exactly the same quality of private certainty I had carried when I sat in the same chairs at their age. I let them laugh. I finished the lesson. I looked at each face and noted the ones who were performing neutrality and the ones who had stopped performing and were actually listening, and I did not sort them into categories of likely and unlikely to survive the posting, because that was not a thought a responsible instructor should carry. But I noticed. The ones who stopped laughing earliest usually came back with the most complete records. I stood at that lectern for 16 terms. I retired from active posting 6 months ago. I was given a ceremony and a formal commendation and a small formal meal with the officers of my division. And at the meal, a young officer who had been a cadet in my last term asked me, over the food, whether I truly believed the warning. Whether, after all the years and all the records, I actually believed what I was teaching. I said yes. She asked what had convinced me, and I told her about Watchpost 11, and about the vessel that came twice and looked at us and left, and about the frequency anomaly that was not a signal but a presence, and about Tav, who was comfortable when he should have been respectful, and who was not on the station when we looked for him. She was quiet when I finished. She was sitting the way the fourth one had sat in the debrief corridor, that specific stillness of someone who has just heard something that has settled into them and is taking up permanent residence. I said, the warning is not mythology. She said she understood. I said, the warning is what remains when the alternative has been tested enough times that the result is no longer in question. Every species that laughed at the warning and then encountered the thing the warning describes has contributed to the data set that produces the warning. Every one of them. The 26 in the registry and the ones who were not cataloged well enough to make the registry. They are the proof. Their silence is the proof. The empty stations are the proof. She was very still. You will receive a posting, I said. Most postings will not bring you near the outer marker, but some will. And if yours does, remember that the protocols are the product of what the record contains. Remember that the record is not complete. Remember that crew status unknown does not mean what the words technically mean. It means that something happened inside a fully functional station that left no mechanism. And remember that in 400 years of records, no one has documented what that mechanism is, because the documentation would require a witness, and the witnesses are the ones whose status is unknown. She nodded. She held it well. She was going to be a good officer. I did not tell her the last thing. I almost did, and then I did not, because the last thing is not in the record, and I have never put it in the record, and I do not intend to. But I will put it here, in this account which I am writing for reasons I cannot fully articulate, into which I am setting down everything I have carried since Watchpost 11 with the faint, irrational hope that writing it will give it less weight in the chest. What I did not tell her is this. On the last night before the relief crew arrived, the 15th night, the fourth one statement about 18 days still sitting in my mind like a perfectly calibrated instrument. I was in the operations ring alone, running the final rotation before I handed the watch to Seth. The sensor display was clear. The amber wash sat where it always sat. The station was quiet. And for approximately 4 seconds, At 2300 hours by the station clock, the quality of the air in the operations ring changed. I cannot describe it better than the fourth one described the frequency anomaly. It was presence, not proximity, not sound or temperature or anything the instruments recorded, because I looked at the instruments and they showed nothing, and I have gone back to the logs since and they show nothing, and I am a trained observer and I know what instruments measure and what they do not. Presence is not a physical quantity. Presence is a thing that living organisms detect through channels that did not evolve for instrument translation. It lasted 4 seconds, then it was gone. I did not move. I did not file a log entry. I finished my rotation and handed the watch to Seth and went to my pod and lay down and looked at the ceiling for a long time. I think it came back one more time. I think it wanted to be sure of something. I think whatever it was deciding in those first 2 contact events, it resolved the question on the 15th night. I do not know what it concluded. I do not know whether its conclusion was favorable to the 7 of us who remained or whether the conclusion was irrelevant to our fates, and it was simply completing a survey it had begun. I do not know whether Tav's absence was related to what it was deciding, or whether Tav's absence was the decision itself, expressed in a way that left no mechanism. I know that I came back. I know that 7 of us came back and 1 of us did not, and that the one who did not was the most comfortable among us, and the least inclined to fear what the warning described, and that those 2 facts may or may not be related, and that not knowing is the condition the warning places you in permanently once you have been near enough to the thing the warning describes. The cadets are in the instruction hall right now. The new cohort. They are sitting in the same chairs where I sat 31 years ago, looking at the amber wash on the projection table, and the instructor at the lectern has 3 scars or 4 or none and is telling them what I was told, exactly what I was told, and they are doing what I did. Behind the eyes, with just enough restraint. They will rotate through their postings. Most will never go near the border. Most will carry the warning as institutional caution built around incomplete data and culturally transmitted anxiety, and they will be right to carry it that way. The incomplete data and the cultural anxiety are accurate descriptions of what the warning is built from, and if they are never posted near the amber wash, they will live and retire and be right. But some of them will be posted near the border, and the border is patient in the way that only very old things are patient, not waiting for anything in particular, not malicious, not threatening in any sense that maps onto how young officers are trained to recognize threats, just present in the way that a fact is present. The amber wash is a fact. The warning is a fact. The 11 entries reading crew status unknown are facts. The 26 species in the registry, their classification glyphs appearing in older records and not in newer ones, are facts. The cadets will laugh today. They will laugh on their postings, at least for a while. They will run the protocols correctly and feel, after several months of uneventful border duty, that the protocols are conservative to the point of theater. They will reach the comfortable conclusion. And the border will wait. And in most cases, the posting will end without incident, and the comfortable conclusion will survive intact and be carried forward into the next generation's curriculum, as another data point suggesting the warning is overcautious. And in some cases, not many, not frequently, just enough to maintain the record, the quality of the air in the operations ring will change, and the sensor display will show something on the inner side of the amber wash that the recognition library cannot match, and the cadet will discover, with the particular clarity that only comes when something has waited patiently for you to stop laughing, that Instructor Munn was not being superstitious. He was just telling them what he knew. I know it now too. I have known it since the 15th night. I will know it until I stop knowing anything. The warning is in the record. It has always been in the record. What you do with it is the first test of judgment you will encounter in this career that actually matters. They are laughing today. I know what that means.